You're watching the skyline of Moscow right now, and something has fundamentally changed. While the world was celebrating New Year's Eve, while champagne glasses were clinking at midnight, 121 Ukrainian drones were painting a different kind of fireworks across the Russian capital. But here's what they're not telling you on mainstream media. Those drones weren't targeting random buildings. They hit Moscow City, the gleaming business district where Russia's elite keep their wealth, where towers worth $1.31 billion house the financial engines of Putin's war machine. And that attack, that wasn't an ending. That was an opening move in a game that's about to reshape everything you thought you knew about modern warfare. Let me take you back to January 1st, 2026. Most of us were nursing hangovers, scrolling through social media, planning our New Year's resolutions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone operators were executing the most audacious sustained aerial campaign against a major world capital in modern history. Russia's defense ministry quietly published data that should have made international headlines, but somehow got buried under holiday news cycles. Ukraine has targeted Moscow with drones every single day of 2026 so far. Read that again, every single day. We're talking about a complete paradigm shift from the sporadic, symbolic attacks of previous years to what military analysts are now calling a relentless pressure campaign designed to bring Putin's war home to the people who've been insulated from its consequences. But let's zoom in on that New Year's attack because the details matter, and the details reveal a level of strategic thinking that should terrify Moscow's leadership. Those 121 drones weren't just randomly launched into Russian airspace hoping to cause chaos. According to multiple intelligence sources and open-source data analysis, Ukrainian military planners specifically targeted the Moscow International Business Center, known locally as Moscow City. This isn't some industrial wasteland on the outskirts of town. This is Russia's attempt to compete with Manhattan, with London's financial district, with Dubai's skyline. We're talking about the Federation Tower, the Oko Tower, the Mercury City Tower, structures that symbolize Russia's aspirations to global economic power. And here's the kicker, these towers aren't just symbols. They house the headquarters of major Russian banks, energy companies, and financial institutions that facilitate the Kremlin's ability to wage war in Ukraine. The $1.31 billion valuation I mentioned, that's not sensationalism. Real estate analysts and financial experts have assessed the combined value of the structures hit or threatened during that attack. And we're looking at facilities that process billions of dollars in transactions daily. When you strike Moscow City, you're not just making a statement, you're disrupting the financial bloodstream of the Russian state. You're forcing insurance companies to recalculate risk premiums. You're making foreign investors think twice about maintaining offices in supposedly safe Russian territory. You're creating economic consequences that ripple far beyond any physical damage the drones might cause. Now, Russia's defense ministry claims they shot down 57 drones over the Moscow region that night alone, out of 437 destroyed across all of Russia. But here's the catch, and this is where the official narrative starts to crack. Russia only reports how many drones they claim to have intercepted. They don't tell you how many Ukraine actually launched. They don't give you detailed damage assessments unless civilians die or unless the damage is impossible to hide. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin has been posting vague updates about interceptions without providing specifics about what got through, what got hit, or how much damage was actually inflicted. This information blackout is strategic. Putin's government cannot afford to let Russian citizens understand the real scope of Ukraine's ability to strike deep into Russian territory with impunity. But independent researchers using open-source intelligence methods, social media posts, satellite imagery, and flight tracking data have pieced together a very different picture. Multiple sources reported power outages in Moscow's Ramenskoe suburb following the December 30th through 31st strikes, leaving somewhere between 100,000 to several hundred thousand residents without electricity and heating in the middle of a brutal Russian winter. Think about that for a moment. Ukrainian drones are now capable of disrupting essential services for major population centers hundreds of miles from the front lines. This isn't just military operations. This is asymmetric warfare designed to erode civilian support for Putin's continued aggression in Ukraine. And that New Year's attack was only the beginning. Let me walk you through what's happened since then, because this is where the story gets even more disturbing from Moscow's perspective. January 2nd, more drones over Moscow. January 3rd, more drones over Moscow. January 4th, more drones over Moscow. January 5th, more drones over Moscow. Russia's aviation watchdog Rosaviatsia has been forced to temporarily close Moscow airports and scores of other Russian airports repeatedly for safety reasons. This is happening during Russia's extended New Year and Orthodox Christmas break, which runs through January 9th, one of the busiest travel periods of the entire year when millions of Russians are trying to visit family or take vacations. Ukrainian drone operators are deliberately timing these attacks to maximize disruption, to create visible consequences that ordinary Russians cannot ignore. According to calculations by RIA State News, Russia's own state media outlet, Russian air defenses intercepted and destroyed at least 1,548 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory and occupied Crimea over just the past week. 1,548 drones in 7 days. Let that number sink in. We're talking about an industrial-scale drone campaign that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. And here's what should really worry military planners in Moscow. Ukrainian drone production capabilities are still ramping up. Reports from Ukrainian defense sources indicate they're now manufacturing drones at a rate that allows for sustained campaigns like this indefinitely, not as one-off spectacular attacks, but as daily operational reality. Ukraine's strategy here is multi-layered and frankly brilliant from a military perspective. First, they're targeting military logistics hubs, ammunition depots, fuel storage facilities, and command centers deep inside Russia, degrading Russia's ability to sustain offensive operations in Ukraine. Second, they're hitting energy infrastructure, oil refineries, power stations, and electrical substations, raising the economic cost of Putin's war to unsustainable levels. Third, they're striking symbolic targets like Moscow City to shatter the illusion of normalcy that the Kremlin has tried to maintain for Russian citizens far from the front lines. And fourth, they're forcing Russia to divert massive resources to air defense systems protecting the interior rather than supporting frontline operations. But here's what mainstream media isn't connecting. This changes everything about the strategic calculus of the entire conflict. For nearly 4 years, Putin has been able to tell the Russian people that the special military operation in Ukraine is proceeding according to plan, that Russian territory is safe, that life can continue normally as long as you don't live near the border regions. That narrative is now in ruins. When drones are hitting Moscow every single day, when airports are closing, when power grids are failing, when skyscrapers worth billions are under threat, you cannot maintain the fiction that everything is fine. Public opinion in authoritarian regimes matters more than people think. Putin's entire political legitimacy is built on a promise of stability and strength. Daily drone attacks on the capital city undermine both of those pillars. And we need to talk about the technology here because this isn't just a story about Ukraine having drones. Lots of countries have drones. What makes this remarkable is the sophistication of Ukrainian drone warfare doctrine. These aren't expensive military-grade Predators or Reapers. Ukraine is primarily using modified commercial drones and domestically manufactured long-range unmanned aerial vehicles that cost a fraction of what Russia spends on the air defense missiles trying to shoot them down. Some military analysts estimate that Ukraine is forcing Russia to expend missiles costing hundreds of thousands of dollars each to intercept drones that might cost only a few $1,000s to produce. This is economically unsustainable for Russia over the long term, especially as Western sanctions continue to bite and as the Russian economy struggles under the weight of war expenditures. Ukrainian engineers have developed swarm tactics, using large numbers of drones launched simultaneously or in waves to overwhelm Russian air defense systems. They've incorporated GPS jamming resistance and autonomous navigation capabilities that allow drones to continue toward targets even if communications are disrupted. They've developed specialized drones for different missions, some designed to carry explosives for precision strikes, others equipped with electronic warfare capabilities to disrupt Russian military communications, and still others serving as decoys to draw fire away from more valuable assets. This is a mature, sophisticated, constantly evolving military technology ecosystem, and it's being developed and deployed in real combat conditions faster than any military innovation since World War II. Now let's talk about what Moscow isn't telling you. Russian state media has been increasingly frantic in its coverage, but also increasingly vague about details. They'll report that air defenses were activated, that threats were neutralized, that the situation is under control. But they're not showing you the satellite imagery that open-source investigators are analyzing. They're not explaining why major Russian insurance companies are now excluding drone attack damage from standard commercial property policies in Moscow and other major cities. They're not discussing the panic buying of portable power generators that's been reported in Moscow suburbs. They're not acknowledging that luxury real estate prices in Moscow city towers have dropped significantly as wealthy Russians reconsider whether those glass and steel monuments to capitalism are really safe places to live and work anymore. And here's the geopolitical angle that should worry everyone. This drone campaign is happening as diplomatic efforts for potential peace negotiations are supposedly underway. Some analysts believe that with changing political dynamics in the United States and Europe, there might be pressure on Ukraine to accept some kind of negotiated settlement. But Ukraine is using these drone strikes to fundamentally alter the negotiation landscape. They're demonstrating that they have the capability to impose costs on Russia that will continue indefinitely regardless of what happens on the ground in contested Ukrainian territories. They're showing potential mediators that this isn't a conflict where one side is simply waiting to be rescued by Western support. Ukraine has developed indigenous military capabilities that give it leverage independent of foreign aid flows. Think about the message this sends to Putin. You can occupy Ukrainian territory. You can destroy Ukrainian cities. You can kill Ukrainian civilians, but you cannot protect your own capital from daily attacks. You cannot shield your economic elite from the consequences of your decisions. You cannot maintain the pretense that Russia is winning this war when Ukrainian drones are hitting targets in Moscow every morning. This is psychological warfare at a strategic level, and it's devastatingly effective because it's backed up by actual operational capability demonstrated daily. We're also seeing secondary effects that aren't being widely reported. Russian military morale is suffering as troops on the front lines hear about attacks on Moscow and wonder why they're fighting in Ukrainian trenches if Russia itself is under attack. Russian defense contractors are being forced to divert production capacity toward manufacturing more air defense systems instead of offensive weapons systems for the front lines. Russian strategic planners are having to rethink their entire defensive posture, something that was supposed to be settled doctrine for decades. And perhaps most significantly, Russia's international image as a serious military power capable of defending its interests is being systematically dismantled, drone strike by drone strike. But that New Year's attack on the $1.31 billion Moscow city towers, that was only the beginning. That's what I meant when I opened this video. What we're witnessing is not a one-time spectacular operation designed to grab headlines. What we're witnessing is the transformation of warfare itself. Ukraine is proving that determined adversaries with technological innovation and asymmetric thinking can impose unsustainable costs on larger, more powerful opponents. They're demonstrating that modern air defense systems, no matter how expensive or sophisticated, cannot provide absolute protection against saturation attacks using cheap distributed platforms. They're showing the world that critical infrastructure in any country, even major nuclear powers, is vulnerable to this new form of warfare. And here's what should keep military planners awake at night around the world. If Ukraine can do this to Russia, imagine what other countries might be capable of in future conflicts. Imagine what non-state actors could accomplish if they acquired similar capabilities. Imagine what happens when this technology proliferates further and when even more sophisticated autonomous systems enter the battlefield. We're watching the birth of a new era of warfare in real time, and the implications extend far beyond the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So what happens next? Based on current trends and statements from Ukrainian military officials, the drone campaign against Moscow and other Russian cities will continue and likely intensify. Ukraine has publicly stated that these attacks are aimed at disrupting military logistics, degrading Russia's war-making capability, and imposing economic costs that will eventually force Moscow to reconsider its strategic objectives. There's no indication they plan to stop, and increasingly, there's no indication that Russian air defenses can consistently prevent these attacks from achieving their objectives. Russia will likely respond with escalated missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, which tragically means more civilian casualties and more destruction. But Ukraine has already endured nearly 4 years of such attacks and has developed resilient defense and recovery systems. The question is whether Russia can endure sustained attacks on its own territory with the same resilience. We're also likely to see Russia investing enormous resources into improving its air defense networks, potentially buying or developing new systems specifically designed to counter drone swarms. But this creates its own strategic problem for Moscow. Every ruble spent on defending Russian cities is a ruble not spent on offensive operations in Ukraine, and every advanced air defense system deployed around Moscow is one not available to protect Russian forces on the front lines. Ukraine's drone campaign is forcing Russia to make impossible choices about resource allocation. And that's exactly the point. International reactions will be fascinating to watch. Some countries will condemn Ukrainian attacks on Russian civilian infrastructure, conveniently forgetting that Russia has been systematically targeting Ukrainian civilian infrastructure for years. Other countries, particularly those supporting Ukraine, will quietly admire the strategic effectiveness of the campaign while publicly maintaining diplomatic ambiguity. Defense industries around the world will be studying Ukrainian drone tactics and technologies, understanding that this represents the future of warfare whether they like it or not. And military academies will be rewriting doctrine based on lessons learned from this conflict for generations to come. For ordinary Russians living in Moscow, life has fundamentally changed. The illusion that they could ignore the war, that it was something happening far away to other people, has been shattered. Air raid sirens are now part of daily life. Checking whether airports are open before planning trips has become routine. Wondering whether your office building might be a target is no longer paranoid speculation. This is the reality that Ukrainians have endured since February 2022, and now it's Moscow's reality too. Whether this leads to increased domestic pressure on Putin to end the war or to nationalists rallying around the flag remains to be seen. But either way, the political dynamics inside Russia are shifting. And that brings us back to those Moscow city towers worth $1.31 billion. They still stand for now. Russian air defenses did intercept many of the drones targeting them. But the fact that they were targeted at all, the fact that 121 Ukrainian drones penetrated hundreds of miles into Russian territory to threaten them, the fact that this is now happening every single day, that changes everything. Those towers are no longer symbols of Russian economic power and modernity. They're symbols of vulnerability, monuments to the fact that Putin's war has consequences that reach into the heart of Moscow itself. And that's a message that no amount of state media propaganda can completely suppress. So here's what you need to understand, what you need to tell people who aren't paying attention, what mainstream media keeps missing. We just witnessed not just an attack, but the unveiling of a new strategic reality. Ukraine has the capability, the will, and the industrial capacity to wage sustained drone warfare against Russian territory indefinitely. This isn't going to stop. This is the new normal. And that New Year's attack on Moscow City, that was only the beginning. Every day brings new strikes. Every week brings new targets. Every month brings improved capabilities and expanded operations. We're watching history unfold in real time, and the implications will reshape global security for decades to come. The question now isn't whether Ukraine can strike Moscow. That's been definitively answered. The question is what Russia does about it, whether Russian society can sustain this pressure indefinitely, and whether Putin's strategic calculus changes when his own capital is under daily attack. Those are the questions that will determine not just the outcome of this war, but the shape of international relations for years to come. And that's why this story matters. That's why you need to be paying attention. And that's why what happened on New Year's wasn't just an attack. It was the opening chapter of a completely new phase in this conflict. Stay informed, stay aware, because what happens next in Moscow will affect all of us whether we realize it or not. The world just changed, and those 121 drones were just the beginning.